I watched in pure, unadulterated horror as my cherished home, the repository of decades of memories, crumbled violently into the churning river below. It was bulldozed, reduced to splinters and dust on the cold, calculated orders of an HOA president, Patricia Sterling. Little did she know, my own brother had just been sworn in as Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court. The irony was almost laughable if the situation weren't so devastatingly tragic, but the real question lingered, heavy in the air. When Patricia, cornered and desperate, comes after me one final time with gasoline and matches, will her vengeful rage destroy everything my fractured community fought tooth and nail to rebuild? I still remember the precise, gut-wrenching moment my peaceful life at Riverwood Estates began its catastrophic unraveling. The guttural roar of a bulldozer engine shattered the morning calm outside my kitchen window, jolting me so hard my coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug. Not again, I groaned inwardly. Predictably, Patricia Sterling stood beside the monstrous machine, clipboard clutched like a weapon, her perfectly styled blonde bob utterly unmoved by the gentle spring breeze. "Mr. Morgan," she called out, flashing that sickeningly sweet, artificial smile that never, ever reached her cold, calculating eyes. "We need to discuss your continued violations." Oh, taking a deep breath, I stepped onto my porch, the familiar creak of the wooden boards beneath my feet, a sound my late wife, Clara, had adored, suddenly sounding ominous. "What seems to be the problem now, Patricia?" She pointed a perfectly manicured, accusatory finger at my mailbox. "That particular shade of blue," she declared, her voice dripping with faux authority, "isn't approved in the HOA handbook. Page 17, Section 4, clearly states all mailboxes must be either forest green or matte black." This was, unbelievably, the 5th citation this week. Yesterday, it was my bird feeder allegedly attracting unsightly wildlife. The day before, my collection of quirky garden gnomes apparently lowered property values. The absurdity was escalating. "I've had this mailbox for 15 years, Patricia," I explained, striving for a calm I didn't feel. "Long before you seized power, became HOA president." Her eyes narrowed, hardening into icy slits. "Grandfather clauses don't apply when the board votes unanimously to update standards, Mr. Morgan, which we did last month." A quick glance around confirmed my fears. Neighbors peeked from behind twitching curtains, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and fear. No one dared challenge Patricia openly, not since she had ruthlessly forced the Davis family to sell their home after their daughter's wheelchair ramp, a necessity, was deemed to violate aesthetic guidelines. The cruelty was breathtaking. "All right," I sighed, trying desperately to keep the peace, though a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. "I'll consider repainting it." "You have 48 hours, she snapped, "before the first fine is levied, $100 per day thereafter." Her gaze then flickered past me, landing disdainfully on Clara's beloved rose garden. "And those non-native plant species," she added, malice glinting in her eyes, "will need to be addressed too." My heart hammered against my ribs. A surge of protective anger rose within me. "Those roses aren't going anywhere," I stated, my voice low and firm. "My wife planted them with her own hands before she passed away." Patricia's face remained an impassive mask. "Sentiment doesn't override regulations, Mr. Morgan. The board meets tonight to discuss further action regarding your property." With a final dismissive glance, she turned and strode away, leaving me trembling with a mixture of rage and helplessness. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was my brother, Michael, likely calling about his promotion ceremony tomorrow. A monumental day for him. I couldn't burden him with my petty HOA squabbles now. "Hey, Michael, what's up?" "Just confirming you're coming tomorrow, Arthur. Big day for me, you know." "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I promised, my eyes involuntarily tracking Patricia as she stopped further down the street, meticulously taking photos of my property from various angles. A shiver traced its way down my spine. "Everything okay? You sound stressed," Michael asked, his concern evident even through the phone. "Nah, just some neighborhood drama," I deflected. "Nothing important." If only I'd known how catastrophically wrong I was. That afternoon, a formal, menacing letter lay waiting in my mailbox. The offending blue one. The HOA demanded the immediate removal of Clara's rose garden, citing dubious water conservation ordinances I knew were selectively enforced. Worse still, they'd scheduled an emergency landscaping intervention if I didn't comply within a terrifyingly short 24 hours. Panic began to set in. Frantically, I called Walter Hayes, a kind, retired lawyer living 2 doors down who'd been a supportive presence since Clara's passing. "They can't legally do this, Arthur," Walter assured me over coffee on his screened porch, the afternoon sun casting long shadows. "Those roses were planted years before any water restrictions were enacted. Plus," he added, pointing towards my yard, "you installed that efficient rainwater collection system. This isn't about legality." "I know," I sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "Patricia doesn't care about the law. She wants absolute conformity or something else." Walter leaned forward, his expression turning grave. "There's more going on here, Arthur. Have you seen the planning documents for Riverwood Estates Phase 2? He carefully spread out a set of blueprints across his table. They depicted luxury condos planned along our shared riverfront, precisely where my modest, beloved cottage stood. "Patricia's husband, Richard Sterling," Walter whispered, his voice barely audible, "works for the development company spearheading the project. They need your land, Arthur, and you've consistently refused to sell." Nausea churned in my stomach as the pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. So all these violations, the mailbox, the gnomes, Clara's roses, it's all just harassment? A tactic to force me out? "I strongly believe so," Walter confirmed, his eyes full of concern. "Be incredibly careful, my friend." That night, sleep was impossible. Instead, I meticulously photographed every square inch of my property, documenting the condition of everything, paying special attention to Clara's vibrant roses. A deep, unsettling premonition told me I'd need undeniable proof very soon. The next morning, I dressed carefully for Michael's ceremony, a knot of anxiety tightening in my chest. As I locked my front door, heart pounding, Patricia materialized, flanked by 3 grim-faced board members and, ominously, the bulldozer driver. "Just overseeing some approved community improvements," she chirped, her sweetness utterly counterfeit when I questioned the heavy machinery's presence. "Nothing that concerns your specific property directly." The man operating the bulldozer studiously avoided my gaze, his discomfort palpable. "I'll be back this evening," I told her, my voice firmer than I felt. "No work should happen on or near my property line while I'm gone. Is that understood?" Patricia offered another chillingly vacant smile. "Enjoy your brother's special day, Mr. Morgan. We'll certainly see you when you return." As I drove away, a glance in my rearview mirror sent a fresh wave of dread through me. The bulldozer was already inching ominously toward my property line, and Patricia was on her phone, gesturing animatedly. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I couldn't miss Michael's moment. He had been my rock through Clara's long illness and devastating death. I resolved to deal with whatever HOA power play Patricia was planning when I returned. If only I had known, truly known, that my entire life, my past, my future was about to be violently shoved into the river. I might never have left my home that fateful day. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and clammy as I turned onto my street later that evening. It felt surreal, like a nightmare bleeding into reality. Police cars, their lights flashing rhythmically and casting eerie shadows, lined the road. Small, hushed clusters of neighbors gathered, whispering behind their hands, their eyes wide with shock and pity. And where my cozy, beloved cottage had stood just that morning, there was nothing. Nothing but a gaping wound in the earth, a shattered foundation, splintered wood, and raw, disturbed soil. The rest of my life, it seemed, had been violently shoved down the steep riverbank, swallowed by the dark, indifferent water below. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. My legs felt like lead as I stumbled out, the world tilting precariously. What happened? I choked out, the words barely audible over the pounding in my ears. Where is my house? And then I saw her. Patricia Sterling stood with her loyal HOA board members, looking unnervingly, unnaturally calm amidst the utter devastation she had wrought. "Mr. Morgan," she began, her voice smooth as ice, "we attempted to contact you multiple times." "What have you done?" My voice was a strangled cry, unrecognizable even to myself. Fury and grief warred within me, threatening to tear me apart. "Your property," she explained, coolly handing me a sheaf of papers, "was deemed structurally unsound during our routine inspection today." Her eyes were devoid of any empathy. The board voted unanimously for an emergency demolition to protect the neighboring properties from imminent collapse. I stared blankly at the official-looking document, the typed words swimming before my eyes, refusing to make sense. This is impossible," I stammered, shaking my head in disbelief. "My home was perfectly sound. It was fine this morning." Officer Miller, a man I recognized from coaching my nephew's Little League team, approached cautiously, his expression deeply uncomfortable. "I'm truly sorry, Mr. Morgan," he said, his voice low. "They had permits. Falsified permits." Walter Hayes's sharp voice cut through the tense air as he pushed through the small crowd, leaning heavily on his cane, but his eyes blazing with righteous anger. "I personally called the county permits office not 2 hours ago. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was approved for demolition on this property today." Patricia's practiced smile tightened fractionally at the edges. "The paperwork is all perfectly in order, officer, I assure you," she insisted, refusing to meet Walter's glare. Suddenly, the full, crushing weight of my loss slammed into me. It wasn't just the structure. It was everything inside. Clara's wedding dress, lovingly preserved in layers of tissue paper. Decades of photo albums chronicling our life together. The small, hand-carved wooden box holding her ashes, which had sat pride of place on our mantel. 30 years of irreplaceable memories, hopes, dreams, now just debris, bulldozed into the mud and muck of the riverbank. My knees buckled, the ground rushing up to meet me. Officer Miller caught me just before I hit the pavement. You will be hearing from my lawyer," I managed to gasp, clinging to his arm for support, my body trembling uncontrollably. Patricia merely shrugged, a picture of callous indifference. The HOA bylaws fully protect the board from litigation when acting in the perceived best interest of the community. Page 43, paragraph 6, she recited, as if quoting scripture. Just then, camera flashes erupted. Isabella Rossi, my neighbor from across the street, was bravely documenting everything, her smartphone held high. "This isn't right, Patricia," she called out, her voice ringing with conviction. "We, the homeowners, never voted for anything like this." "The board voted," Patricia corrected sharply, as your duly elected representatives. Walter gently helped me to my feet. You can stay with me tonight, Arthur, he offered quietly, his kindness a small anchor in the swirling chaos. As we slowly turned to leave the scene of destruction, Patricia delivered one final, cruel blow. "Oh, and Mr. Morgan?" she called after us, her voice laced with triumph. "Your non-compliant mailbox and those unsightly non-native roses have been completely removed as well. Consider all violations officially cleared." Something inside me, stretched taut for days, finally snapped. I spun around, pointing a shaking, accusing finger directly at her. "You wanted my land," I yelled, the accusation tearing from my raw throat. This was never about violations, this was about greed. For a fleeting, almost imperceptible split second, Patricia's carefully constructed mask slipped. Behind the facade of civic duty, I saw a flash of something cold, calculating, and deeply avaricious in her eyes, before she instantly regained her composure. "That's quite a serious accusation, Mr. Morgan," she retorted smoothly. "I certainly hope you have proof." "I have proof," Isabella stepped forward boldly, her phone still recording. "I've been recording all the HOA meetings for months for the community newsletter. Last month, Patricia Sterling specifically mentioned wanting to clear obstacles for the new riverfront development project. A wave of murmurs spread through the gathered neighbors like wildfire. Patricia's husband, Richard Sterling, who had materialized beside her, tugged urgently at her sleeve, whispering frantically in her ear. "This meeting is adjourned," Patricia announced abruptly, her voice strained. "Please disperse immediately, or you will all receive notices of violation." As the neighbors reluctantly began to drift away, casting fearful glances back at the rubble and at Patricia, my phone rang, shrill in the heavy silence. It was Michael, undoubtedly wondering why I ducked out of his celebratory reception so quickly. "Michael," I choked out, the words catching in my throat. Something terrible happened. My house, it's gone." "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" Michael sounded alarmed, his celebratory tone instantly vanishing. "The HOA, Patricia Sterling, she bulldozed it while I was at your ceremony. Everything, Michael. It's all gone. Clara's ashes, our photos, everything." Tears streamed down my face as the full horror washed over me again. His voice shifted instantly, becoming sharp, focused, and filled with a cold authority I'd rarely heard. "Arthur, listen to me very carefully. Don't say another word to anyone. Don't sign anything. I'm on my way, right now." As I ended the call, my hand trembling, I saw Patricia watching me from her own immaculate porch across the street. A smug, satisfied smirk played on her lips. She had absolutely no idea who my brother truly was, or what catastrophic forces she had just unleashed upon herself. That night, huddled in Walter's spare bedroom, sleep was an impossibility. Through the window, I could see the gaping dark void where my home had stood for nearly half my life. The relentless rushing of the river below seemed to mock me, echoing the emptiness inside. I clutched the only tangible thing I had left from my old life, the jacket I'd worn to Michael's ceremony, the worn wedding photo of Clara and me tucked safely in the inner pocket. "I'll make this right, Clara," I whispered to her smiling image, my voice thick with grief and a rising determination. "Somehow, I'll make this right." At dawn, a loud, insistent knock startled me awake. Walter opened his front door to find Michael standing there, imposing and resolute in his formal attire, the very same clothes from yesterday's ceremony, where he had been sworn in as Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court. "Where is my brother?" Michael demanded, his voice resonating with the newfound weight of his position. In a moment of supremely unfortunate timing, Patricia Sterling chose that exact moment to step out of her own house, perhaps to survey her handiwork in the morning light. She froze mid-step when she saw the official state vehicle parked discreetly down the street, and then her eyes landed on Michael, recognition dawning slowly, terrifyingly, on her face as she took in his unmistakable judicial robes. Who is that?" she asked her husband Richard, her voice suddenly unsteady, though loud enough for us to hear clearly across the lawns. Walter Hayes allowed himself a small, grim smile, the first I had seen since the previous day's disaster. "That, Mrs. Sterling," he announced, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet morning air, "is the Honorable Justice Michael Morgan, Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, and you, madam, just bulldozed his brother's house." The color drained completely from Patricia Sterling's face, leaving her ashen. Her mouth opened, then closed soundlessly. She stared at Michael as he turned slowly toward her, his expression grim, promising consequences she could never have possibly imagined when she decided to destroy my home, my life, for a river view. "They did what?" Michael roared, his voice echoing off the mahogany-paneled walls of his chambers. He slammed his fist down hard on his expansive desk, rattling the framed family photo of us fishing on Lake Harmony years ago. I'd never, in my entire life, seen my usually calm, collected brother this incandescently angry. His face flushed a deep crimson as he stared, aghast, at the photos on my phone. Stark images of rubble and ruin where my home had stood just hours before. Patricia Sterling, the HOA president, she bulldozed my house into the river, Michael, while I was at your swearing-in, I explained again, my voice still thick and cracking with residual shock and grief. Everything I owned, all of Clara's things, her ashes, gone. Michael began pacing his chambers like a caged tiger, his new judicial robes billowing dramatically behind him. "This woman," he seethed, stopping abruptly, "destroyed your home because of garden gnomes and a blue mailbox?" He spun back towards me. "Did they give you any proper written notice? Any formal hearings about demolition?" I shook my head, feeling numb. Just those daily violation notices for stupid things. Nothing, absolutely nothing about demolition. Just then, my brother's executive secretary poked her head cautiously into the room. "Justice Morgan, apologies for the interruption, but you have the governor holding on line 1. Cancel all my appointments for the rest of the week," Michael instructed her, curtly, his voice sharp with authority, "and get me Judge Evans, the county sheriff, and the district attorney on a conference call, immediately." I sat there, adrift in a sea of legal jargon, as Michael commanded the phone lines. Criminal trespass, destruction of private property, potential civil rights violations, emergency injunction, asset freeze. The terms flew thick and fast. "You're staying here tonight, Arthur," Michael insisted later, his voice softening slightly as he saw my exhaustion. "The guest suite is all ready for you." Sleep, however, remained elusive. At the first hint of dawn, we drove back to Riverwood Estates together. Michael was dressed in casual clothes, but he carried his formal judicial robes carefully folded in a garment bag. "Evidence preservation," he muttered grimly as we pulled up to the yellow police tape, now cordoning off the disaster zone that was once my property. 3 marked police cars sat sentinel out front. Predictably, Patricia Sterling burst out of her front door, clad in an expensive-looking pink silk bathrobe, as soon as she spotted us. "This is outright harassment," she shouted, marching furiously towards us, her face contorted with indignation. "The HOA acted entirely within its legal rights. Page 43, paragraph 6, clearly states—" "Mrs. Sterling," the sheriff interrupted firmly, stepping calmly between us. He was holding an official-looking document. "I have a court order here to deliver." He handed her the papers. "You are hereby summoned to appear at an emergency hearing at 2 p.m. today regarding the unauthorized demolition of private property located at this address." Patricia snatched the paper, her eyes blazing. "This is utterly absurd. I'll call my lawyer immediately. We were simply rectifying a clear safety hazard." It was then that Michael stepped forward, and I saw the precise moment Patricia Sterling truly registered who he was. Her face drained of all color, her jaw slackening in shock as he calmly removed his judicial robes from the garment bag and slipped them on, right there on the manicured lawn between our properties. The symbol of his office hung heavy on his shoulders. "Mrs. Sterling," Michael said, his voice formal, measured, and carrying the undeniable weight of the state's highest court. "I am Justice Michael Morgan, Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court." He paused, letting the words sink in, the silence amplifying the neighbors' collective gasp. "While I have, of course, recused myself from presiding personally over your case due to the obvious and profound conflict of interest," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "I can assure you that every single judge in this circuit, the district attorney's office, and the sheriff's department are now fully apprised of precisely what transpired here yesterday." Patricia's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Neighbors began appearing on their porches and lawns, drawn by the commotion, watching the unfolding drama with rapt attention. This is intimidation," she finally stammered, desperately trying to regain control. "No, Mrs. Sterling," Michael replied, his voice dangerously calm. "This is what due process actually looks like, something you egregiously denied my brother before unlawfully destroying his home and all his possessions." As if on cue, a news van screeched to a halt at the end of the street, and a reporter leaped out, followed closely by a cameraman. "Who called the media?" Patricia shrieked, looking wildly around. "I did," came a small but clear voice. We all turned. Isabella Rossi stood there, still in her nursing scrubs from her night shift, looking exhausted but resolute. "I recorded the entire demolition on my phone yesterday," she announced, holding it up. "I was too scared to try and stop it then, but I'm not too scared to show the world what you did, Patricia." Patricia started to retreat towards her house, but stopped dead as two plainclothes detectives purposefully approached her front door, holding evidence bags. They were meticulously boxing up her computer tower and files from her home office. "You can't do this," she cried, panic finally cracking through her facade. "Search warrant, ma'am," one of the detectives replied curtly, holding up a document signed by Judge Evans just an hour before. I watched, stunned, as Patricia Sterling, the untouchable queen of Riverwood Estates, finally ran inside, slamming her door shut. Through her large front window, I could see her pacing frantically, phone pressed to her ear. "Michael," I whispered, turning to my brother, the reality of the situation slowly sinking in. What's going to happen now?" Michael put a firm, reassuring arm around my shoulders. "Justice, Arthur," he said grimly. "Real justice." That afternoon, the courthouse buzzed with an unusual energy. I sat behind the formidable property attorney Michael had procured for me, apparently the best in the state. Patricia arrived, flanked by a team of 3 expensive-looking lawyers, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored power suit. Her earlier panic replaced by a renewed, steely confidence. "This will all be thrown out," she hissed venomously as she swept past my aisle. "My husband plays golf with Senator Wilson, you know." Judge Evans entered, a stern, no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes and silver hair, who fixed Patricia with a long, unimpressed stare over her reading glasses. "Mrs. Sterling," Judge Evans began, her voice cutting through the courtroom's tension. "This court has reviewed the preliminary evidence concerning your actions as HOA president. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The demolition of Mr. Morgan's home appears to be not only grossly unauthorized by any legitimate HOA procedures, but also potentially criminal in nature. Patricia's lead lawyer immediately jumped to his feet. Your Honor, the HOA bylaws clearly state, I have reviewed the bylaws, Counselor. Judge Evans interrupted sharply, silencing him. The court possesses authenticated copies from 2020, 2021, and 2022. Interestingly, she continued, her gaze fixed on Patricia, the specific clause authorizing emergency demolition without homeowner consent only appears in the version your client provided to the sheriff yesterday. Would you or Mrs. Sterling care to explain that rather significant discrepancy? Patricia began whispering frantically to her lawyer, whose polished composure was visibly crumbling under the judge's scrutiny. Later that night, from the window of Michael's guest suite, we watched, astounded, as a large moving truck pulled up discreetly to Patricia Sterling's house under the cover of darkness. Hired hands began carrying boxes out while Patricia supervised, glancing anxiously at her watch every few minutes. She's making a run for it, Michael said grimly, already dialing the sheriff's direct line. Patricia managed to load 3 large suitcases into the back of her Mercedes sedan before flashing blue and red lights flooded her driveway, blocking her exit. 2 uniformed officers approached her vehicle, holding official papers. Are they arresting her? I asked, pressing my face closer to the cool glass, my heart pounding. No, not yet, Michael replied, watching intently, but the court just issued an emergency order freezing her assets and forbidding her from leaving the county while the criminal investigation is ongoing. She's not going anywhere tonight. As the police spoke firmly with a clearly agitated Patricia, I noticed lights flickering on in houses up and down the street. One by one, my neighbors were emerging from their homes, gathering silently on the sidewalks, watching as Patricia Sterling's desperate escape plan collapsed around her. Were they finally ready to stand up against the tyranny they had endured for so long? Or were they merely spectators, watching the latest dramatic episode unfold in our troubled neighborhood? I woke abruptly to frantic, insistent knocking at Michael's front door. The sky outside was just beginning to pale with the first hints of sunrise as I stumbled downstairs, still groggy, wearing borrowed pajamas. When I opened the door, Isabella Rossi stood there, breathless, still in her nurse's uniform from the night shift. Arthur, you need to come, quickly, she gasped, eyes wide. Everyone's at Patricia's house. It's happening now. Confused but alarmed, I threw on the clothes I'd worn the day before and raced with Isabella back towards Riverwood Estates. What I saw when we arrived left me utterly speechless. At least 30 of my neighbors, people who had previously averted their eyes or offered only hesitant smiles, had formed a determined human chain completely encircling Patricia Sterling's property. Some held hastily made signs, HOA tyranny stops now, and justice for Arthur Morgan. The atmosphere crackled with newfound courage and righteous anger. What's going on? I asked, spotting Walter Hayes near the front, looking resolute despite leaning on his cane. Walter stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with a strategist's intensity. Patricia tried to remotely delete files from the HOA cloud storage system at 4 a.m. this morning, he explained, patting a thick leather binder tucked securely under his arm. But I anticipated something like this months ago. I didn't trust her, so I set up system alerts and, he added with grim satisfaction, I kept meticulous hard copies of everything. We're making sure she doesn't destroy any more evidence, added Isabella, taking her place back in the human chain. My husband started calling everyone after your brother's people left last night. We decided enough was enough. From her front window, Patricia appeared, phone pressed tightly to her ear, her face a mask of fury. When her eyes landed on me, standing there with Walter and the growing crowd, she violently yanked her curtains closed. "I should have done this years ago," said a tall man I recognized as Dr. Davis. From the end of the street, the man whose daughter's wheelchair ramp Patricia had targeted. She threatened to put a lien on my house when my wife was dying of cancer, simply because our lawn wasn't perfectly mowed for 2 weeks. Suddenly, the floodgates opened. More stories poured out, tales of petty tyranny and abuse of power, elderly neighbors on fixed incomes, blindsided by exorbitant special assessments, young families fined because children's brightly colored toys were visible from the street, selective, vindictive enforcement against anyone who dared to question Patricia's increasingly autocratic decisions. "But why?" I asked, bewildered by the depth of resentment revealed, the sheer amount of pain one person had inflicted. "Why didn't anyone stop her sooner?" "She started small, Arthur," Walter explained, opening his binder to reveal impeccably organized documents, financial records, meeting minutes, altered bylaws. "First, it was seemingly reasonable things, stopping that fellow who genuinely wanted to paint his house neon green, getting the broken playground equipment fixed. People appreciated that initially." He flipped through pages of financial statements. Then she gradually replaced legitimately elected board members with her own cronies, exploiting obscure loopholes in the bylaws. "And look here," he pointed to invoices and bank transfers. "This landscaping company that charges nearly triple the market rate, owned by her cousin, the construction firm that got the exclusive no-bid contract for the clubhouse renovation, her husband Richard, sits on their advisory board." Just then, a sleek black Audi screeched to a halt nearby, and a man in an expensive tailored suit emerged. Patricia's husband, Richard Sterling. "What in God's name is this circus?" he demanded, arrogance radiating from him as he shoved aggressively towards Patricia's front door. "Get off my property, all of you!" A police car pulled up silently, and Walter immediately approached the officer. "Officer, we have credible reason to believe evidence destruction is currently in progress inside that house," he stated calmly, handing over copies of the financial records he'd just shown me. "These documents strongly suggest potential embezzlement of significant HOA funds." The officer immediately radioed for backup. "Not until the police have finished their investigation, Mr. Sterling," Walter replied firmly, standing his ground despite Richard looming over him. Richard's face reddened with fury. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he snarled. "I'll have every single one of you sued for harassment and trespassing." "And do you know who I am?" countered a soft, measured voice from behind him. Michael had arrived, unnoticed in the commotion, dressed today in a simple, understated suit, without his judicial robes. He stepped forward, calm amidst the tension. "I believe the police might have some questions for you regarding your involvement in the proposed Riverside luxury development project, Mr. Sterling." Richard's angry bluster visibly faltered. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, avoiding Michael's direct gaze. "That's odd," Michael said conversationally, glancing down at his phone, "because I seem to have copies of emails here, exchanged between you and Apex Tech developers, specifically discussing how acquiring my brother's property was the crucial final step needed to complete the lucrative riverfront parcel for your new luxury condos." He looked up, his eyes sharp. Emails sent, coincidentally, the day before his house was mysteriously and violently bulldozed. The color completely drained from Richard Sterling's face, leaving him looking pale and cornered. By noon, multiple news vans lined our street. Reporters eagerly interviewed the emboldened neighbors, while uniformed police officers carried evidence boxes filled with documents and electronics out of the Sterling house. Inside the community center later that afternoon, The atmosphere was electric during an emergency homeowners meeting. Walter stood at the podium alongside the County Registrar of Deeds. The official HOA bylaws filed with the county, the registrar explained, displaying side-by-side documents projected onto a large screen. Never contained any clause authorizing the unilateral demolition of a homeowner's property. These official filings appear to have been illegally altered sometime within the last month. Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowded room. Furthermore, "Whoosh," Walter added, stepping back to the microphone, his voice ringing with conviction. My review of the HOA's finances has uncovered that precisely $427,000 of our collective HOA funds were transferred over the last fiscal year to a previously unknown shell company. He paused for dramatic effect. A shell company named Riverside Holdings LLC, solely owned and operated by Richard and Patricia Sterling. Gasps filled the room. Barry, the timid HOA treasurer, who had always seemed terrified of Patricia, stood up shakily. I signed those transfer authorizations," he admitted, his voice trembling. "Patricia told me they were necessary payments for the new community security system upgrades and extensive landscaping improvements. She provided invoices and everything." "Forged invoices, Barry," Walter corrected gently but firmly, displaying the fraudulent documents alongside proof that the legitimate vendors were never actually paid. The afternoon court session was packed, with many of my neighbors filling the public gallery, their presence a silent testament of support. Patricia and Richard sat at the defendant's table with their lawyers, their earlier confidence visibly evaporated, replaced by strained, anxious expressions. Judge Evans entered, reviewed the newly submitted evidence, then looked up sternly. Based on the compelling financial records provided by Mr. Walter Hayes, corroborated by testimony from HOA board members, and preliminary forensic accounting, Judge Evans declared, her voice leaving no room for doubt, this court finds sufficient probable cause exists for criminal charges against both defendants. She listed them off: fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, felony embezzlement, and malicious destruction of private property. Patricia's lawyer leaped up yet again. "Your Honor, my client was merely acting in good faith under the interpretation—" "Save it for the trial, Counselor," Judge Evans cut him off curtly. "Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Sterling, please stand." They rose slowly, hesitantly. Patricia's usually perfect posture was finally failing her. She seemed somehow smaller, diminished. "You are both hereby remanded to custody," the judge declared. "Bail is set at $500,000 each, cash or bond. Surrender your passports immediately. Any assets suspected of being purchased with misappropriated HOA funds are subject to immediate seizure." As court officers approached with handcuffs, Patricia suddenly lost all composure. She whirled around, pointing a shaking finger directly at me across the courtroom. "This is all your fault," she screamed, her voice shrill with hatred and desperation. "If you had just been reasonable, if you had just removed those hideous gnomes and painted your damn mailbox like everyone else, none of this would ever have happened." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. "No, Patricia," I said quietly, meeting her wild gaze, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "This happened because you genuinely believed the rules only applied to other people, not to you." As they were led away, Patricia thrashed against the officer's grip. "You'll regret this. I have connections, powerful connections. This isn't over." Richard, however, simply hung his head, whispering something urgently in his wife's ear that made her suddenly stop struggling, her face going utterly blank. Outside the courthouse steps, a wave of relief and solidarity washed over me as neighbors surrounded me, offering hugs, words of support, and multiple invitations to stay in their homes until mine could be rebuilt. "We're going to fix this, Arthur," Isabella promised, tears welling in her eyes, but this time they were tears of hope. Together, Walter approached with several other vindicated board members. "We held an emergency vote just now," he announced, a weary but satisfied smile on his face. "We've moved to immediately dissolve the current HOA structure and board, effective immediately. We'd like you, Arthur, to help us create something new, something better, something truly representative of this community." As everyone began talking excitedly about organizing community cleanup days for my property and fundraising efforts, Michael pulled me aside, his expression suddenly grave again. "Arthur, there's something else," he said quietly, his voice serious. "The developer Richard Sterling was working with, Apex Tech. My office learned they've already broken ground on a massive project just upstream from Riverwood Estates. Preliminary environmental impact reports are concerning. If that project goes forward as currently planned, without significant modifications, it could drastically alter the river's flow patterns during heavy rains. It could potentially cause catastrophic flooding that would affect this entire neighborhood." I looked over at my newfound allies, celebrating our hard-won, albeit small, victory against Patricia's tyranny. Should I shatter their fragile hopes so soon? Should I tell them that an even bigger, potentially more devastating battle might be looming on the horizon? One that could wash away not just my rebuilt home, but all of theirs too? The weight of the future settled heavily upon me. "They found Clara's wedding ring," I shouted, my voice thick with emotion, holding up the small, mud-caked gold band that one of the search volunteers had miraculously unearthed from the riverbank debris. Tears streamed freely down my face. Neighbors, people who just weeks ago might have offered only a polite nod, now worked tirelessly side by side, forming a human chain along the treacherous slope, sifting through mud and wreckage, searching for fragments of my shattered life. Isabella rushed over, enveloping me in a tight hug, crying happy tears herself. "Oh, Arthur, I knew we'd find something special today." This woman, this kind soul, who had barely waved before Patricia Sterling's reign of terror, inadvertently forged our bond. The sounds of hammers, saws, and determined construction filled the air where my home once stood. Walter Hayes, clipboard in hand, directed the volunteer crews with the precision of a seasoned general. "The new foundation needs to be raised significantly higher than before, Arthur," he explained, showing me updated blueprints. "This elevation, combined with reinforced retaining walls, means that even if the river does flood, due to that upstream development, your new home will stay safe and dry." My temporary residence, Michael's guest bedroom, had transformed into the unofficial command center for what the local news dramatically dubbed the Battle of Riverwood Estates. Reporters camped out daily, hungry for updates on Patricia's upcoming trial and the remarkable story of the neighborhood's self-driven transformation. "You've become quite the reluctant celebrity, Arthur," Michael remarked one evening, pointing to the front page of the state newspaper where my story was headlined. "People across the country are double-checking their own HOA covenants and bylaws because of what happened here. I didn't want fame. I just desperately wanted my life, my quiet sense of normalcy back." A hesitant knock at the door interrupted our dinner. Michael answered it and returned a moment later, followed by a nervous, subdued Richard Sterling standing awkwardly in the hallway. I found these tucked away in our home safe, Arthur," Richard whispered, his voice strained, handing me a thick manila folder. They're Patricia's detailed plans for the entire neighborhood." My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside were architectural drawings, financial projections, and internal memos. It was all there. Patricia's ruthless, methodical plan, cooked up in conjunction with platinum developers to systematically force everyone in Riverwood Estates out, one manufactured violation at a time. Starting with me because my property offered the most desirable river access. My lot was clearly marked. Phase 1. Acquisition target. Why are you showing me this now? I asked, searching his face, unable to reconcile this man with the arrogant bully I'd seen just days before. Richard's eyes filled with tears. Because she made me choose, Arthur, he choked out. Between her relentless ambition, her schemes, and our marriage, our conscience. For years I chose wrong. I enabled her. I can't ever undo the horrific damage done to your home, to your life, but maybe I can help make things right going forward. Walter carefully reviewed the explosive documents later that evening, his legal mind immediately grasping their significance. This, he declared, tapping the folder, this is the undeniable smoking gun. With these detailed plans, combined with the falsified HOA documents and the financial embezzlement trail, Patricia Sterling is facing very serious, long-term prison time. That night, a violent thunderstorm rolled in, rattling the windows and mirroring the turmoil still churning inside me. Sleep remained elusive as I lay listening to the rain, thinking about all I had lost, but also, strangely, about what I had unexpectedly gained. This resilient, awakened community, once strangers living in parallel isolation, now profoundly connected through shared crisis and common purpose. Suddenly, my phone buzzed ominously with a text from an unknown number. You think you've won. This isn't over. A chill snaked down my spine. I immediately showed Michael, who frowned and made a quick call. Patricia was released on bail late this afternoon, he confirmed grimly, his voice tight with frustration. Despite the prosecution's objections, the preliminary judge didn't consider her a significant flight risk, given the asset freeze. As lightning brilliantly illuminated the guest room window, for one terrifying split second, I thought I saw a figure standing motionless out in the driving rain, watching the house. When I blinked, they were gone. A trick of the light, or something more sinister? Michael, I asked, my voice trembling slightly, should we be worried? The bail conditions strictly forbid her from contacting you or coming anywhere near Riverwood Estates, Michael reassured me, though his own expression remained tense. She'd be incredibly foolish to violate those terms now. But foolish wasn't Patricia's defining characteristic. Vindictive pride was. The piercing electronic alert from the construction site's security camera jolted me from a restless doze around 3 a.m. My blood ran cold as I watched the grainy night vision footage on my phone. A lone, hooded figure moved stealthily through the relentless rain, heading directly towards the fresh, vulnerable wooden framework of my new home. They were carrying something horrifyingly familiar. A gasoline can. Michael, wake up! I shouted, scrambling out of bed, already dialing 911 with shaking fingers. It's Patricia. She's at the construction site. She has gasoline. Flames suddenly erupted, leaping violently into the night sky as I raced towards my half-built home in Michael's car, sirens wailing in the distance. Patricia had already doused a significant portion of the fresh lumber and was struggling to empty the rest of the can when multiple police cruisers screeched onto the scene, their flashing red and blue lights cutting sharply through the torrential rain. "Drop the gasoline, now!" an officer commanded through a megaphone. Instead, Patricia, her face a grotesque mask of pure hatred, twisted by the flickering firelight, struck a match. The tiny flame sputtered precariously in the downpour as she stood frozen for a moment, a figure of pure malice. "Everything I worked for, everything I built, it's all gone because of you." She screamed wildly at me, across the muddy yard. If I can't have this property, then nobody will. Suddenly, Richard Sterling appeared seemingly out of nowhere, sprinting towards his estranged wife. "Patricia, please stop. This isn't you," he pleaded desperately. That momentary distraction was all the police needed. An officer launched forward, tackling Patricia hard. The lit match flew harmlessly into a nearby puddle, extinguished instantly. She fought wildly, thrashing and screaming incoherent threats and accusations as they wrestled her into handcuffs. "You don't understand," she shrieked, her voice raw with fury as they led her towards a police car. "That property was promised to me. The developer, Apex. They already paid me a $50,000 advance." Neighbors, roused by the sirens and the glow of the fire, emerged from their homes in pajamas and raincoats, watching in shocked, horrified silence as Patricia Sterling, finally stripped of all pretense, confessed her crimes on camera, recorded by multiple phones, including Walter's. By morning, Patricia's bail was unequivocally revoked. The prosecutor swiftly added attempted arson and violation of bail conditions to her rapidly growing list of felony charges. Sleep remained a distant memory for days. I jumped at every unexpected sound, half expecting further retaliation. Richard Sterling filed for divorce the following week. "I'm selling our house, Arthur," he told me, looking 10 years younger, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted. "Half of the proceeds will go directly towards rebuilding your home. It's the least I can do. It's the only right thing to do." Summer arrived, bringing long, sunny days and dedicated work crews to the site daily. My incredible neighbors organized shifts, bringing thermoses of coffee, packed lunches, checking on progress, and often just sitting with me, offering quiet companionship. Isabella orchestrated a community donation drive that filled an entire storage unit with furniture, kitchenware, linens, everything needed to furnish a new home from scratch. "Arthur, we've found something else," Walter announced one blazing July afternoon. Carefully carrying a mud-encrusted, tarnished metal box he gently dug out near the river's edge. The river had given up another one of its stolen treasures. Inside, waterlogged but miraculously intact, was Clara's cherished jewelry box, her mother's delicate pearl necklace, the elegant watch I gave her for our 10th anniversary, and most precious of all, nestled in the damp velvet lining, her wedding ring. My hands trembled uncontrollably as I slipped the ring, still cool from the river mud, onto my pinky finger. "Clara would be so happy," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "So happy to see everyone coming together like this." Patricia Sterling's trial began in early September. I dreaded the prospect of testifying, of having to face her again in court. "Just tell the truth, Arthur," Michael advised calmly as we drove to the courthouse that first morning. "Your truth is powerful. That's all you need to do." In the courtroom, Patricia looked startlingly diminished behind the imposing defense table. Her expensive designer clothes were replaced by a plain, ill-fitting navy suit. Her once perfectly coiffed blonde hair was now dull and limp. When our eyes met briefly across the room, she quickly looked away, a flicker of something unreadable. Shame, fear, crossing her face before it vanished. The jury, after hearing days of compelling testimony from neighbors, the treasurer Barry, Walter, the police, and seeing the damning financial records and Patricia's own recorded confessions, took only 3 hours to deliberate. They found her guilty on all counts: fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, destruction of property, and attempted arson. The judge, a senior colleague of my brother's, known for his stern demeanor, showed absolutely no mercy. 20 years, he pronounced, his gavel cracking down with sharp finality that echoed through the stunned courtroom. 20 years in state prison with eligibility for parole considered only after serving a minimum of 15. Plus, he added, looking directly at Patricia, full financial restitution owed to all victims, including the Riverwood Estates Homeowners Association and Mr. Arthur Morgan. Cameras flashed relentlessly as Patricia, her face utterly blank with shock, finally broken, was led away by the bailiffs. Winter slowly melted into a hopeful spring as my new home, built with care, resilience, and the overwhelming support of my community, neared completion. On moving day, it felt like the entire neighborhood arrived, not with pity but with genuine joy, bearing furniture, food, flowers, and countless offers of help. "Arthur, we have something we want to show you," Walter said, a warm smile on his face, guiding me out to the newly landscaped front yard. There, nestled under a young, flowering cherry tree, near where Clara's roses had once bloomed, sat a beautiful, simple stone bench. A small brass plaque gleamed in the sunlight. It read, "Clara's Garden, where new beginnings take root." My wife, Clara, would have absolutely loved this, I whispered, overcome with emotion, gently touching the cool, smooth stone. That evening, as neighbors gathered spontaneously on my new, welcoming porch for an impromptu housewarming party, sharing laughter and stories under the setting sun, Michael raised his glass in a toast. "To communities," he said, his voice filled with pride, "that discover their strength and stand together against adversity." He paused, looking at me, "and to brothers who thankfully never have to face the bullies alone." Richard Sterling, now tentatively dating Isabella Rossi, in a surprising twist that seemed to delight everyone, shyly added his own toast. "To second chances," he murmured, raising his glass of iced tea. I looked around at these wonderful people, individuals who were once merely adjacent strangers, separated by fences and unspoken rules, now genuine friends, forged together by shared adversity and collective action. The new community charter, drafted collaboratively by a committee I'd been honored to join, hung framed in my entryway, signed by every single homeowner. Its very first rule, written in bold, declared, "Homes are for people, not power." As fireflies began to blink their gentle lights in the deepening summer twilight, children chased each other freely across lawns, no longer governed by petty, arbitrary rules. Dogs barked joyfully, unburdened by the threat of violation notices. Gardens grew wild, vibrant, and beautiful, reflecting the diverse personalities of their tenders. "You know, Arthur," Walter said quietly, standing beside me on the porch rail, watching the peaceful scene unfold. "Patricia wrote me a letter from prison last week." My heart gave an involuntary stutter. "She did? What did she want?" "To apologize," Walter replied, looking almost as surprised as I felt. She said losing everything, absolutely everything, finally made her realize what actually matters in life." I looked at my rebuilt home, different, certainly, from the one Clara and I had shared, yet built on a stronger foundation, both literally and figuratively. It was somehow better, imbued with the spirit of the community that had rallied to rebuild it. I thought about Patricia, alone in her cell, stripped of her power and status. Maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible, even after causing so much pain. I nodded slowly. "Sometimes," I said softly, thinking of my own journey through loss and unexpected gain, "sometimes that's what it takes." This story serves as a powerful reminder that unchecked power, even on a small scale like an HOA, can lead to devastating consequences when wielded with arrogance and greed. However, it also illuminates the incredible strength found in community solidarity. When people overcome fear and isolation to stand together for what's right, they can challenge tyranny, achieve justice, and rebuild not just homes, but also trust and connection, creating something even stronger and more meaningful than what was lost. Sometimes, the worst circumstances can reveal the very best in people. What did you think of Arthur's journey and the community's transformation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.